Well, you know you're in trouble as a preacher when you can't find a single theologian who even pretends to understand the passage of Scripture that you've been assigned to preach. Most of the time, these Bible commentators are happy to assert their opinion as fact, but invite them to come explain the parable of the dishonest manager from Luke chapter 16, and everybody starts suddenly discovering that they have previous engagements and deferring to somebody else and offering a list of vague possibilities as they make a quick exit. My favorite of these is a commentator who writes for 3 pages on this parable, commits to nothing, and then ends with this sentence, and I'm quoting, "Perhaps the best we can hope is that the grappling of God's people with the difficult part of God's book produces a weary but earnest friendship among the children of light in this generation." You can almost hear his tires screech as he makes his getaway. Thanks for nothing. It's a tough parable. There's this master and his manager. The manager's life is the opposite of everything Jesus ever taught, the opposite of everything we teach. He is fired for incompetence. But when the master calls upon him to make account of everything before he goes, it buys him time in which he still has, in the minds of his master's debtors at least, the authority to make deals. And so he goes to the master's debtors and he gives them a break on their payments. So the master may make less profit, but the debtors now feel indebted to the manager. Are you with me? He makes friends the way the mafia does, quid pro quo. He's the kind of shady character that usually gets what he's got coming at the end of the story. But in Jesus' parable, we're shocked to learn that this master commends him for his shrewdness. Not his dishonesty per se, but his shrewdness. What in the world do we do with that? Well, first we can remember what parables are. They are not instruction manuals about how to live. They are comparisons that reveal truths, particularly the truths that we refuse to see. If you have a stain on a paisley tie or on a print skirt, you may not be able to see the stain until you compare it with another place in the pattern that doesn't have a stain, and there it is. In a sky full of clouds, you may not be able to see the teddy bear until someone else holds the shape of a teddy bear up by the cloud. Ah, there it is. Parables may present good examples or bad, but they reveal things that we cannot or will not see in ourselves. They help us see truth, and they assume that if we can see it, it can set us free. Last Sunday, we saw how the heartwarming parables of Luke 15, the lost sheep, the coin, the lost son, these are comparisons that expose those people who are unable to celebrate mercy when it happens. But the parable in Luke 16 is a black comedy that exposes the way we often bring more ingenuity to the way we manage money than the way we manage relationships. And that reveals which of the two we value the most, doesn't it? So first of all, this parable is a comparison that reveals where our values lie. Secondly, we can see here that Jesus recognizes the fact that we don't live in Mayberry, that this is a corrupt, fallen world, and the streetwise Jesus sees through it all. He sees how things really work. The system is rigged, and it's rigged to create as much disparity between rich and poor as possible. In his time, wealth was tied to the ownership of land. Even the temple's wealth came from their owning land. Everybody who didn't own land, therefore, had to survive by her own wits, either by exploiting others or being exploited themselves, or both. Look for white-hatted heroes and black-masked villains in this parable, and you'll be disappointed. They are all flawed characters in an unjust system. So the second thing it shows us is that even in a corrupt society, our heart will be where our treasure is. You see, between the time he was fired and the time he had to give an account, the manager could have stolen his master's money and gone on the run, and the master knows that. But the manager chooses instead to use his master's money to leverage some new friendships and alliances for the coming days when he will need them. The master sees his cleverness and commends him for it. I can imagine the master saying with a grimace, "Well, it's about time you started managing something." The manager may have even been a little pleased to see his own methods being put to good use. He got rich somehow. Jesus then commends this parable to us. What do we make of it? Is he commending stealing to us? "You have heard it said, 'Do not steal,' he said. But I say that if you covet your neighbor's riding lawnmower, you've already committed the theft in your heart." Jesus sees stealing as a symptom of a deeper spiritual problem, one that the people of God in general and religious leaders in particular should have already conquered. But look at verse 14 and see who the target of this parable really is. The Pharisees who loved money. They, the ones who of all people should know better, they are the targets of this parable because they have been using people to make money. They have turned the rituals of forgiveness and purification into a financial bonanza, using the faith of gullible people to make money. Even the crooks, Jesus said, even the crooks have enough sense to know that relationships are the more valuable commodity. Even the crooks know that the money comes and goes. But when the chips are down and you're desperate, you can call on a friend or call in a favor, and you might just survive. "You Pharisees," he said, "you use people to make money, but even the crooks know it is better to use money to make friends." And I'll bet the disreputable people sitting closest to Jesus thought that was the funniest thing they had ever heard a rabbi say. When the protagonist of the story is a failure and a thief, and that character is held up in comparison to you, and the point is made that you don't even rise to that level, well, you can consider yourself to have just been insulted. I have to confess something this morning. I have a weakness for the erudite insult. I know that's bad, but I think that if you have a pulse and a sense of humor, the eloquent insult is one of the most satisfying forms of literary expression. Let me just give you a few examples. Groucho Marx said, "I've had a perfectly wonderful evening, but this wasn't it." Moses Haydes said, "Thank you for sending me a copy of your book. I'll waste no time reading it." Songwriter Stephen Bishop said, "I feel so miserable without you. It's almost like having you here." But the greatest insult in history has to be the exchange between Winston Churchill and Lady Astor. She said, "If you were my husband, I'd give you poison." And without missing a beat, Churchill said, "Madam, if you were my wife, I'd drink it." When insults are gratuitous, they're just plain mean. But when they are earned and deserved, and they're delivered in the soft packaging of a story, they can serve as a friendly warning. Paul says that when you have hard things to say, you should speak the truth in love. So maybe a parable is the most loving way Jesus could warn the Pharisees about what they were doing and where they were heading and what they were missing and the terrible damage they were doing to themselves and to God's people. This jab is aimed at people who put money and security before relationships. Simple as that. If that's us, personally or corporately, we deserve the insult, and we need, for our own sakes, something to slap some sense into us. Religion, whose purpose is to stamp out sin, may succeed in inhibiting bad behavior, but if it never establishes that love is the reason to avoid sin, it will only amount to legalism. Religion that tries to hold it all together and control everything for appearance's sake will only amount to hypocrisy. Religion that demands duty and obligation without ever setting people free to explore their gifts and respond to the Spirit and risk for God in life-changing ways, well, it will only amount to institutionalism. And religion that is self-serving, that instead of helping the poor, enriches itself at the expense of the poor, no matter how it justifies that, well, that religion is no better than a criminal enterprise. The parable of the dishonest steward is an insult, but it is a divine insult because it is intended to save us from that kind of religion, to keep us from being like those passengers on the Titanic who, while some ran up on deck to rescue people, ran down below instead to try to rescue their jewels from the safe. Jesus says the corrupt manager, the shrewd manager, has it all over the pious Pharisees on two accounts. Number one, he managed creatively with what he had. We are made in the image of a creator God, and we are most like God when we are creative. We must reclaim this. Too often, the church has been like that legendary patent official who said that everything that could be invented had already been invented in like 1804. We rationalize our laziness and our sinfulness by telling ourselves we had no options. But faith believes there is always a more creative solution because we serve an infinite God for whom all things are possible. So the first thing the manager got right was being creative instead of escapist. And secondly, the manager has it all over the Pharisees because he knows that his security resides more in his relationships than in his money. Jesus says it in verse 15, "That which is highly esteemed among people is detestable in the sight of God." Ambition, materialism, status-seeking, and greed, all rewarded by this culture, all intended to get results, devalue people in pursuit of some lesser thing. And we use blame and anger and lust and vengeance and apathy to evade responsibility, but they destroy our relationships. So the second thing this manager got right, he knew the value of friends. He managed what he had creatively in order to make friends. How well do we do that? When I was a student at Furman, I had 7 best buds, and we came up with a simple dare. The one of us who got married first had to pay the others $50 apiece. Now remember, this was back in the 1900s. That would have been, for 6 people, for one of the 7 to pay $300. And we were college students without enough pocket change to do our laundry. None of us had $300. This was huge. But none of us was in a hurry to get married either. And we figured that even though we were irresistible, it would take decades for us to be tamed and domesticated. So we shook on it. Turns out it was Russ Dean who was the first to attach the ball and chain to his ankle. So the rest of us happily signified his wedding day on our calendars as payday. When that day came, Russ presented us each with a legal contract, drafted, witnessed, and notarized by a real-life lawyer named Schaefer Kendrick. And this legal document said that while Russ would honor his agreement, he had some terms of his own that we had to agree to in order to get paid. And they are these. We had to agree to receive payment on the terms of $1 per year for 50 years. And that the contract would be null and void if any of us failed to stay in touch and preserve the friendship. Knowing we were no match for Schaefer Kendrick, we all signed on. And so every August, I get $1 in the mail. And even though they are spread out all over the United States, around that time we get back in touch. And I am blessed all over again to be reminded that I have such ingeniously loving friends. If you got money, Jesus says, use it to earn friends. In fact, use whatever you've got. Would God have sent His only begotten Son if God valued anything more than this world? Could Jesus have gone willingly to a cross if He valued anything more than His friends? And this is the ministry of Jesus, finding creative ways to make a friend, dismantling a success-worshiping and money-valuing system and replacing it with a God-worshiping, people-valuing way of life. And we're called to be His shrewd managers, friends. Wise as serpents. If the crooks can make money for themselves, how much more can we, with God's help, use money to make money for the poor? If white-collar thieves can steal investors blind and never do time, how much more can we, with God's help, use new technologies and social networks and creative investments to do exponential good? If the gangs in the inner city can organize for crime, how much more can we, with God's help, organize and mobilize our many gifts to transform those self-same neighborhoods? How much more? This is an invitation to be the authentic church. Our gifts, creatively woven together, synergistically multiplied to accomplish God's redeeming and relational work. We do this pretty well around here, but we haven't even scratched the surface. Did you hear this week about Christina Rubke? Christina Rubke was born with arthrogryposis and has no use of her arms or her legs. She has no use of her arms or her legs. But get this, on weekends, she sails sailboats around San Francisco Bay. I don't know if you've ever tried it, but sailing is physically demanding work. It takes everything you've got, every muscle in your body. How does she do it? She does it because a network of friends called the Bay Area Association of Disabled Sailors have brought their time and energy and treasure, and don't you know, ingenuity, together to create a device where Christina can control an entire sailboat with her chin. Just her chin. Can you see her out there on the water on a sparkling day? The sun on her face and the breeze in her hair. What do you think that experience means to her? I'm betting it means almost as much as those people mean to her. Jesus said we would do even greater things than He did. And we will. We will do wonderful, miraculous things, so long as when we set out to manage, we let Jesus be the master.